Hi there, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about an amazing new feature within Photoshop CC. Shake reduction is new in Photoshop CC, and it's the first time we've had a tool built specifically to reduce blurs caused by camera shake. What happens though if the camera is steady and the subject moves a little bit? Can we use the shake reduction for that? Well, yes, to a certain degree. It's not a substitute for focus pictures, although I have seen it perform some pretty miraculous things even on pictures that were slightly out of focus. The first thing that we're going to do here is I'm in Lightroom, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my initial adjustments to this just like I would, and then I'll bring it over into Photoshop. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over on the right hand side. I'm in the develop module within Lightroom, and I'm going to come over here to the auto button above exposure. Now, just because there's an auto button doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. Auto is great. What it does, it's going to go ahead and set the black point and the white point of the picture for me automatically, so I don't have to do it. And it's went through and made some differences in exposure, contrast, and so on. One thing you can do if you're not aware of it, if you want to check your white point value in the picture, you can hold down your Alt or Option key while you're on the slider under whites in Lightroom and also Adobe Camera Raw, and you can move this back and forth until you see pixels on the screen that appear. Now those are the whitest areas of the picture, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just checking this, and I'm going to stop it right about there, we'll say. You also could come down on blacks and do the same thing. You can move it back and forth until you see the first pixels appear, and these are the purest black areas of this picture. Again, automatic is going to take care of that for me automatically. What I might also do at this point is I might click here on my image and press and drag and move it around, and I shot this at a slow shutter speed, of course, just to deliberately blur the waterfalls. If I hit the I key in Lightroom, I can bring up the image information about this, the date and the time it was shot and the size. But we can also see this was shot at 1/6 of a second at f/25 to blur the water in this waterfall. So even a little bit of vibration possibly in the ground, me walking, whatever, could have blurred this picture slightly. So at 1/6 of a second here. Again, I'll zoom in on an area here, and it looks pretty good. What I'm going to do here is I'll mosey around, and I'm going to come back over to the right hand side, and I'm going to bring up my clarity slider a little bit. I normally start about 50, see how it looks, and then go from there. So here's without the clarity slider, and then with about 50 on the clarity slider. If you're not familiar with the clarity slider, what it's doing is going in and looking at the midtones of this picture. Not necessarily the highlights, not necessarily the deepest, darkest shadows, but the midtones of the picture, and actually going in there and increasing the contrast on those midtones. For the most part, I use it quite a bit. It really makes a big difference. And also I can come over here on vibrance and bump up the vibrance of the colors a little bit if I wanted to too. But right now I'm just going to probably leave it. I'll double click on vibrance to reset to 0. And also what I do is I never want to forget to come down to camera calibration. And this was shot in Camera Raw with my camera. So I'm going to apply the actual profile from my camera, and I'm going to look at Camera Faithful. I'm going to come down to the landscape, which will enhance the colors a little bit, neutral, and so on. So your camera, if you shot in Camera Raw, you should be able to access these different profiles, and because it is a raw image, I'm allowed to apply these. For the most part, if I'm not shooting a landscape, I'm usually using camera neutral. It's amazing how much of a difference there is between these profiles. I kind of like this camera landscape profile that's being applied here. So I'm going to go ahead and use this. And this is coming from my, because this is a Canon camera I shot this with, this is the Canon landscape profile. If you had a Nikon or other cameras, then you would have your profiles here also. I'm going to come over here also to lens correction, and I'm going to enable what's called a profile correction here, which is basically going to know what lens was used in this shot, what zoom level, and it's going to make any lens corrections necessary to make this look proper. I can also come down here now in the new versions of Photoshop CC and Lightroom, my uprightness, and this is going to make it, try to see if I can get it more quote-unquote level. So I'm going to come over here to automatic, and that's going to look at this and it's going to try to correct some perspective and levelness of the picture. And it looks like it actually went in there and uncropped my picture, but that's okay. Let me turn it off and I'll turn it back on. You can see there's just a slight bit of correction on levelness on that. Now I'm going to go back to my basic panel here for a second. I'm going to crop the picture. I'm going to go ahead and just do R in Lightroom, and I'm going to crop it, and I'm going to change my crop, we'll say to 1 by 1. And maybe I'll move it up here a little bit, kind of balance it between the foreground and the background. And because I am in Camera Raw using in Lightroom, I can come back and adjust this crop if I want to. I kind of like that. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the Enter key. Okay, so I'm doing my quote-unquote standard things I would do in the picture here. I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open this up in Photoshop CC and see if I can remove some of this camera shake that I have. So I'm going to right click here in Lightroom, and I'm going to come down to Edit In, and I'm going to come over to Edit in Photoshop CC. Okay, now we're in Photoshop CC. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this. I'm going to just hit my Z key, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this picture. I'm at 50% or so. Let's see here. Let me come in a little bit more. Here's 100%. I'm going to move this over so I can actually look at my picture here, and I notice this is, it's kind of soft in here. Is that shake? Is that because of depth of focus or depth of field? I think it's due to camera shake. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit my Command or Control key. I'm going to go back to 0, fit in window, and I'm going to come over to my layers panel, and I'm going to do Command or Control J, and I'm going to jump myself a new layer. The reason for this is so I can apply the shake reduction to my layer 1, and I can go back and compare it or mask out parts of it because I still have my background layer, my original layer I came in with. To activate the actual processing for shake reduction, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just go up to the filter menu, and I'm going to come down to sharpen, and I'm going to come over to shake reduction. Now the shake reduction is going to automatically kick in here in a second. It's going to look at my image, and you can see in the center of the picture it's actually marqueed out a specific area and is looking at that and kind of applying the shake reduction without me doing anything here. At this point in time, what this little window is called, it's called the blur estimation region. Now what I'm going to do here is I deliberately, when I shot the picture, had the shutter speed really low. So I want the water blurred. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move this estimation region to a different place. I'm going to go in the center of it here. I'm going to get my little four-way arrow over the center of this, and let me bring this up maybe to these rocks in this area. And I will also zoom up on this. Let me zoom up here. Probably should have zoomed up before I actually started the process. And what I'll do is I'm going to hold my space bar down here, and I'm going to move this down so I can see this region. Now if you look at the upper right part of your screen here, it says rendering course preview. So it's doing a rough preview of what's going on right now, and then now it's doing a final result. So if you come down to the opposite corner of the screen, there's a little bar here, a blue bar that's filling up here. This is a progress bar letting me know when it's how far it is in the shake reduction process. So we'll wait for that to work a little bit. Sometimes this takes maybe 10-15 seconds. Sometimes it takes longer. I've had it take 60-90 seconds depending on how large the file size is, how fast your computer is. I'm working on a MacBook Pro, so it's going through and it's looking at this and trying to remove it. It's almost done here, and we'll take a look at it. Now, here in this picture here is I'm going to come down on this detail area here. I see these two flat rocks here, and here's two flat rocks in the middle of my screen here. So gotta have a little patience as we work on this. So again, it's rendering this course preview. I'm going to go ahead and now it's rendering out the final results of this, a little bit finer detail. Okay, so now it's actually kind of done it. Now if I have you come over to the right hand side, this little detail window here, typical of a lot of filters within Photoshop, once you apply them, you can come over on the detail of the thumbnails and press and hold, and that will temporarily turn off the filter or whatever you're doing. So notice how blurry this is. And then when I let up, it applies the shake reduction. So this, this is looking really, really, really good. Now if I go up here above in the little area that's showing me the blur estimation region, it gives me this little square here. And what this is doing inside of here, you'll see a little white dot or maybe even a streak here. This is showing me where it sees blurry pictures and in what direction. If it was really a severe camera shake in one direction, like I was hand holding it and I hit the shutter, and when I depress the shutter, maybe it forces the camera from upper right to lower left, you'd actually see a white streak there, and that's how it knows how much to actually try to correct this. So this is kind of the shape of the blur, and often the shape of the trace here covers only a few pixels. With more severe blurring, like I mentioned before, it might look like a streak or a smudge. There's different items up here in blur trace settings up above here. You could look those up in a little more detail. As a result of the shake reduction filter, it's sharpening up things, so it may cause things to look a little more grainy than I like. I can bump the smoothing up, so it's like a smoothing filter going in there, and it's taking these shake reduced areas where they've been sharpened and corrected and kind of removing some of maybe the grittiness of this. This is something that you're going to have to move back and forth and kind of find the yin and the yang and the compromise when you go ahead and do this. I think I can see some graininess down here in the water. It's starting to look a little bit grainy. We'll see after this final result is previewed whether or not that's been reintroduced because of the smoothing being brought down so much. I'm going to take a look at what happens here. So there, it's done. Boy, it's really hard to see. So let me bump the smoothing back up and see if I can't take a look at this as I put the smoothing back maybe to its default here. And again, I'm looking at this area of the picture down here in the waterfall where I see it's looking really grainy. Some of these hot areas in these rocks where they're wet are getting a lot of kind of glowing. I actually think it looks better down here in the water. It's not so grainy. It's smoothed out some of that sharpening artifacts. We're introducing some noise. Also down here there's an artifact suppression, and if I see any really pronounced what I call halos or ghosting around edges and other artifacts, I may boost the artifact suppression up a little bit to try to remove those. Again, I think you have to keep in mind both smoothing and artifact suppression are actually going in there and blurring your image, so you kind of have to use them sparingly. Again, what you can do is you can come over on this detail panel. Again, if you press and hold, you can see it with it off, and you can turn it back on. So I'm going to take a look at this. I think it looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead, and there are some tools in the upper left here that you manually can specify the direction and strength of a blur. I'm actually letting Photoshop handle that. There's a hand control to pan around and your traditional zoom command. And I'm going to come back over to the layers panel. I'm going to turn off the visibility of layer 1. So there's the original, and you can see it's fairly blurry. And then if I turn it back on, much better. Actually now it's a usable picture. Before I would be a little bit hesitant to print it out, but now it looks much better. I'm going to drag the background layer right down to the trash can, and I'm just going to keep this layer, and I'm going to quit Photoshop CC, save the changes, and this is going to bring your copy right back into Lightroom. So there's just a little trip over to Photoshop CC to look at the new shake reduction filter. I have seen it do some very amazing corrections on a picture. So go ahead and give it a shot. Not every picture is going to work the same, but it sure is worth the investment in time and money to see if you can rescue some pictures.